how do we take a lot of the proven learnings from like legacy business? So like CNBC has, 24 hours a day of content and programming. How do we take some of the things that have really worked well there, whether it's their talk around the markets, whether it's Shark Tank, whether it's emphasis on small business and entrepreneurship? How do we take those disciplines and reprogram that into the digital age in a multimedia environment? And how do we do that where people have proven in the creator economy and the multimedia world that people identify with people? How do we take Morning Brew's brand and put it at the top, but allow ourselves to build sub-brands around individuals who people on the internet will way more resonate with?
Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Listen, man, so I've been following Morning Brew for some time. It's been an incredible story. You're one of my favorite follows on Twitter as well in the last year or so since I've been following you at Business Barista. If anyone isn't following you already, make sure you go and do that. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about Morning Brew, the background, how you grew it, but also get into the future of media. And we're going to go behind the mind, which is the second part of the show. We're going to talk about some of your ideas and take it from there. So before we do that, I want to bring up this message from a random grandma on the internet that I found, a 90-year-old grandma, and she had texted her grandson and said, and she had said, hey, I just read that you're in this national newsletter, and I get a report every day from a newsletter called Morning Brew. There was a whole section on nuggets, which was something related to this guy. Yeah. And then the guy responded back and said, that's so funny. I didn't know you read the Morning Brew. And she said, every morning, sometimes funny, always informative.
So not only do we have an amazing testimonial, but it's one of those things that at least I've experienced where no matter how big the company gets, it like never gets old to see stuff like that. Like to see people having their own connections and like their own moments in life that were created because of the brew. Even though it was a single moment, and obviously we have a large audience, it never gets old.
I can imagine, man. And even on my much smaller scale, like I get little snippets like that, and it just makes my whole day, and it makes all the hard work completely worthwhile. So yeah, I guess my question to that is, I wanted to ask you to describe what Morning Brew was, but I thought that was like the best way to actually describe from someone who loves the brew. But yeah, from your side, like if you were just saying like in 1 or 2 minutes, like what is Morning Brew and essentially its value proposition and who it's for, like what is Morning Brew?
Yeah, it's funny because the analogy that I use to describe it, I think, has made it really easy, which is if Morning Brew is a book, right? What is the title of the book? And I would say the title of the book is Making Business Better, making business content better. And so that ties right to our mission. Like to me, the title of the book is our mission, which is to empower the modern business leader with engaging and accessible content. So if that's the title of the book, then it's like obviously a book has chapters. And to me, the chapters are pretty clear of Morning Brew's book of making business content better. It was chapter 1 was newsletter, if you want to call it that, as a hobby when we were in college. Chapter 2 was newsletter as a business. When I quit my job, my co-founder Austin decided not to work full-time in finance. And we had to figure out how are we going to actually take this thing that tens of thousands of people read and actually make money from it so that we can pay ourselves. Chapter 3 was not just newsletter as a business, but newsletter business. So not just having one newsletter, but having a portfolio, a collection of newsletters that serve different needs for the modern business leader. And so that was everything from our daily newsletter, which was the OG product, to Retail Brew, which is our B2B newsletter specifically for people in the retail industry. And chapter 4, which is where we are right now, is Morning Brew, the media brand. This transition from newsletter business to media brand, where Morning Brew is a multi-context, multi-channel media company that is still serving that same mission, but is doing so in a variety of ways that isn't just newsletters and isn't just business news.
Love that. Yeah, that's beautifully put. And I love that evolution from like the hobby on the side when you guys are both incredibly young, but in a good way. And we'll get onto some of those things as well. And I think what happens is, like from the outside, you just see, oh, cool, a newsletter. You have no idea there's millions of people that subscribe to this. It's a business that does millions in revenue and profit. And last year in October 2020, you were also acquired by Insider Inc., which owns Business Insider, eMarketer, and other brands, right? I don't know if you're allowed to say the amount, but it was reported for $75 million. I don't know if that's in the ballpark or not. Are you able to comment on it? Or
Can't comment on the price.
Okay.
All I can say is that that's what was reported.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that sounds good. So yeah, this is reported, so I'm not like breaking any news here. It was supposedly an all-cash deal, which is incredible if that was the case. And you and your co-founder hopefully had a great exit from that. And now you're still there. You're not just like, oh, we sold something and now bye, see you later. You're actually there building the next chapter of the company, running kind of autonomously from the parent company, it sounds like.
Yep.
So we'll go into a little bit of that today as well. Just to give a sense of scale beyond just revenue, the last numbers I saw, there were 2.5 million daily subscribers. 2.5 million. Is that still about right?
So the daily newsletter, so one of our properties, the first one we ever launched, has 2.7 million subscribers, and more than 1 million people open it every day. So we have a 40% daily unique open rate on the newsletter, which, just for context, the average newsletter is, something around a 20% open rate. So it's double the industry average. I think what we have figured out is how to build habit where someone thinks about reading the brew just like they think about brushing their teeth. It's a no-brainer. And then if you include the entire Morning Brew universe, so all of our newsletters, our podcast, the total ecosystem is more than 3 million people.
Wow, that's incredible. And again, for context for people, like if you've listened to the show for a long time, we've had Sam Parr on the show who founded The Hustle. A similar, like I put you guys in the kind of new media newsletter business. Sure. And he's also just had an exit now, being sold to HubSpot, which is awesome. But I always thought of you two as like the biggest ones in that kind of category. And yeah, it was daily. And why I also kind of grouped you together, though obviously you're very different, is just you've had this unique voice, right? Like we've all grown up and we're probably around the same age, but if you say 20 years ago to our parents, like they were used to reading the Wall Street Journal or,
right,
whatever, like business, serious, wear a suit sort of vibe newspaper. And you guys tell us real informative stuff, but you've got this great tone that I can hear your tone even on Twitter. And similarly, I can hear the Hustle's tone when Trung, their guy, is like making jokes on the internet. So today we're going to dive into a little bit about like audience building and why you think it's so important, not just for businesses, but for individuals as well. Is there anything else on Morning Brew before we move on in terms of like context for anything I missed out?
No, I would just say, the business, a snapshot of it is, like you said, we sold a majority of the company in October of 2020, still own a significant portion of the business. And we continue to be obviously as excited as ever to be able to grow this ecosystem. I think the reason we're so excited is now we have the resources and the mentorship of a partner, while also now having this massive built-in top of funnel to find new and exciting ways to leverage the existing audience, but also leverage our existing audience to introduce new people to the ecosystem. And so it's like, we think this is just day one in the sense that we have this huge built-in audience and we have the resources and support of, a multi-billion-dollar company.
Completely. And we'll definitely go into the ins and outs of the brew in a minute. But before we do that, just high level, let's talk a little bit about audience building and why you're so passionate about it. I've heard you even describe wanting your employees, if they want to become their own, essentially brands or creators or whatever. Of course, not for everyone, but for the ones who want to go down that route, you want to help encourage them and help them along the way. So let's go into that a little bit. So I've heard you give an example in the past about Sahil Bloom, who's a great guy on Twitter. He's grown from like 200 followers to 150,000 in like a year and a month or so.
Yeah, it's wild.
Incredible. And for people who don't follow him, he does these amazing summaries of complex financial topics. He studied economics at Stanford and he works in private equity. I've spoken to him a few times and he says he's not even monetizing at all. He just enjoys doing it and maybe one day he will. But let's go into like examples like that, because are there any others that really stand out to you that are just doing an incredible job, and why do they stand out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the ones that stand out to me are, first of all, David Perel. I think a lot of people know David, but he's such a good example of basically just showing the power that the internet has to like not just take people who already have large brands and accelerate them or grow them, but to actually use the internet as the starting point for your career in a way, right? Like the way that David tells it is he worked in a few jobs before going on his own, but it's not like he had this, this incredible brand where he had built companies or whatever. He decided to start writing essays, and then he decided to start building his audience on Twitter. And like he has created this really robust, massive following, all from starting it on social. Like he wasn't like, Gary V, who then goes to Clubhouse and has 200,000 followers on day one. He brick by brick built it. And now he's done this incredible thing that I think a lot of creators have difficulty doing, which is connecting all of the parts of the audience funnel, is how I refer to it. So it's like, I think of every media company or every personal brand as having basically all of their assets existing somewhere on the audience funnel. And what the audience funnel is there are 3 steps. At the top is rented audience. The middle step is your owned audience. And your bottom step is the monetized audience. And at the end of the day, what that just describes is all of the ways that you can interface with an audience, all of the ways that you can create content, and all of the ways you need to think about the trade-offs of where you decide to create content and create product. And so, for example, using the example of David Perel, David started by creating rented audience. He started by publishing blogs just on the internet at like davidperel.com. Then he very quickly took to Twitter and was building his audience on Twitter, which is another example of a rented audience. How I define a rented audience is it's basically a platform of the internet. So it's a video platform, it's a social network, it's a website that people get to through Google search. And I call it rented because you don't fundamentally own the relationship with the consumer. Your Twitter audience is Twitter's audience, and you are renting that audience from Twitter. And I think that's a key distinction, because the positives of doing that is you are on a platform, and platforms are built to have people discover your content if it's really good. So shareability is amazing. Discoverability is amazing. It is the place that is easiest to build an audience if you are creating great content around great ideas. The negative is that any of these platforms, depending on the platform, can make changes that will impact the extent to which your audience, who's actually their audience, sees your content. And so what David did a great job of is building up a large rented audience, but not resting on his laurels and not spending time building out owned audience and monetized audience too. So David now has a newsletter that I believe he sends out once a week. I don't know how big that list is, but that's an example of converting your rented audience into an audience now that you own the email addresses. You can take those emails with you anywhere and no one will take that from you. And then he's gone a step further and monetized that audience through his educational program, Rite of Passage, where it's now he's actually like creating and adding value for himself and for his audience, because now some percentage of his 150,000 or whatever the number is Twitter followers convert to be rite of passage students. And those people pay, I think, $1,500 to $2,000 to be a part of this 8 to 10 week course. And when he's a one person business, maybe with two other people helping him, that's an incredible ability to have both freedom in your lifestyle and financial freedom to do the things you want to do.
Completely. And he's got so much leverage. I think one of them, I did 2 episodes with Jack Butcher, but one of them was live. So there was an idea we talked about an audience is like a stem cell. And just thinking that of like when you already have an owned audience both a rented and owned audience, you're able to just adapt over time. So, if one day he wants to launch a fund, which many people are doing,
Yep.
Or if he wants to start creating physical products, whatever, like maybe he creates the best writing kit in the world or whatever. There's so many things that you can eventually go and do. So we'll definitely dive into a few more examples of that. So thanks for going through your framework. That's super helpful. Top of funnel, rented, middle owned, bottom monetized. One question before we go into that a little bit more though is, who is this not for, right? Because I think, of course, like anyone who's listening to this has probably already heard this concept and understands the benefits, but it's not necessarily for everyone either,
Totally.
even if everyone can gain from it. So like if I said, who are the people that you've noticed to say, okay, well, that's not necessarily for me. Like what do they look like?
I mean, the first person that this wouldn't be for is someone who doesn't enjoy creating content. If you don't enjoy creating content on the internet, then this is going to be painful for you, because you think about how much time it takes on the internet to build up an audience. It's like literally creating content, responding to content, engaging with others daily, multiple times a day. And so if that doesn't bring you energy, it is going to become torture. So I would say like that's the biggest thing, is if you don't enjoy the act of doing that, there are other ways to be successful in your career, to be successful in building your brand without being a content creator. And so that's like the first one that comes to me, is you have to enjoy it, because
Completely.
if you don't, it's going to be painful.
And it's a lot of work. And for me, I've even noticed with the podcast, I've been doing this for 5-6 years, it's adapted to my life, right? Like I used to have a job and I changed to another job and now I'm self-employed. And each moment I had to kind of rethink and say like, okay, am I doing this at the right cadence? Am I doing it at the quality and level that I want it to be? Am I trying to do too much and I can't balance this new job I've just started a few years ago? And I think that's really key. And to be transparent, I'm doing that literally as we speak, because my editor, who I've worked with for 2 years, just unfortunately has taken a full-time gig, which is amazing for her and proud of her, but like it means I'm having to rejig my process a little bit, and it gives me the room to say, okay, cool, now I'm making this change, maybe it's a great time for me to bring on another person or focus on different types of micro content and stuff like that, and it's continuously something you have to evolve.
Yeah, I mean, I think content creation is all about momentum. When you aren't creating content for a long period of time, I think it's you find that you lose momentum in a few ways. You lose creative momentum, where in the beginning it's harder for you to think of like good content to create, because it's like the muscle hasn't flexed in a while. And I think there's also audience momentum. When people get used to seeing the stuff you're putting out, they build habit around it. When there's a hiatus, the internet rewards being prolific. And so when you aren't creating content for a while, I think it also takes time to build momentum back up, not only creatively, but from an engagement perspective, to retrain people to look out for your stuff and to engage with it. And I think that's a really important thing to recognize, because it's like all that means is your content rewards you for spending more time thinking about it creatively, and the internet rewards you for creating a lot of content and not taking breaks. And so what that means is like the act of content creation is a marathon and not a sprint, even though at times it feels like a sprint. And so it's literally like a marathon. It's like if you don't enjoy running at all, or you at least don't enjoy, or if you don't enjoy the challenge of completing a marathon, you're going to hate the process of training for the marathon and running the marathon. You need to at least have an appreciation or a love for the process of building up your brand that will be a means to an end of creating other opportunities in your life, or the act of content creation itself. So I'll create that distinction, which is like You don't have to be someone who is content obsessed on day one, but you at least need to be dedicated enough to the outcomes that are created from creating content to be willing to stick with it and do it when it's not convenient for you.
Completely. Yeah, that's a great point for sure. One other nuance I wanted to bring to that part is you read the thread that I
Yep.
posted a few days ago. One of the points on there was about audience does not equal distribution. And well, there's a nuance to it, right? Which is you can have X number of followers. Two people could have 100,000 followers, and one of them has resonance and depth with that audience and overlap with interests that they care about, or trust, and the other one might not. An example I didn't put in the thread, but I've shared previously, is in a previous job of mine, we did a influencer campaign with like one of the top 5 Instagram accounts in the world that had like 80 or 100 million followers. And I saw the numbers of what that drove versus an email list with maybe 50,000 or 100,000 people that you've never even heard of that second person. And it was night and day. The second one what made a big difference. And that's not to say the first influencer didn't have value, but the sort of stuff that we were sharing with that person, their audience wasn't going to them for that information. They were following that person because they liked the pictures or whatever.
I think that brings up this really important question to ask whenever you look at any audience, which is like, why, let's just talk about a random person who has 500,000 followers on Twitter. I think it's important to ask the question of why did those 500,000 people decide to follow them? Is it all 500,000 people followed this person because, I'm just going to pick a random topic, they create great content around modern industrial architecture? Like, did all 500,000 people follow this person because of that? Or does this person create content around modern industrial architecture, health and wellness and sports business? And so you have 150,000 people that follow for the content around modern industrial architecture, 150,000 people around wellness, and then 200,000 people around sports business. Because all of a sudden, basically, this person really has 3 audiences: a 150,000 person audience, a 150,000 person audience, and a 200,000 person audience. Also, it's like a question of when and how did they get their audience? Did they get their audience from people deciding to opt in because of content they saw this person create? Did they decide to follow this person because this person is constantly in podcasts or interviews, or they have a big audience somewhere else on YouTube and they've decided to follow them on other channels? Did they get this audience through some form of promotion, through growth hacking when a platform was early? Like, there's a lot of people I know on Twitter
or being featured in the beginning.
Exactly. There's a lot of people I know who have like massive followings on LinkedIn, like literally 2 million followers. And when they post, they get like 20 likes. And I think, and there's obviously, it's not the reason that's happening is because the why and the how of people's decision to follow them clearly wasn't all around the same reason. Like, I think I'll use the example of Pomp, right? I know you've spoken to Pomp, right?
Yeah, he was on the show too.
So one of the reasons I think so many people engage with Pomp, like his engagement is crazy, is because it is incredibly deep aspiration for specific stuff that he talks about. Like, I don't know how many followers he has now. I think it's somewhere between 500 and 600,000. I could be wrong. But my view is like, let's take that same example I had of 500,000 people following that other account. For Pomp, it's not like 500,000 people following for health and wellness and modern industrial architecture and sports business. It's like 500,000 people have seen Pomp's content around crypto, NFTs, or like money in general, and they followed him for that. And so I think he just has maintained such a tight guardrail around the stuff he creates, which means that he has really created a specific contract with his audience, and he constantly fulfills on that contract that he has delivered to his audience. Whereas that first example I gave to you, someone who followed that 500,000 person account for modern industrial architecture, if that's the contract that they've set up with that person who decided to follow them, well, now they're fulfilling on that contract maybe once every 5 posts, because several of their posts are around other topics. And I think that in a nutshell illustrates the power of building around a specific niche or a collection of a few very specific topics.
Yeah, and that's a great example. And I think with Pump, the interesting thing with him is he built one audience at a time, but he also started with quite a core message and was growing on one wave. And then over time, as people like him and they get used to what he's posting, he can expand, or he has expanded that aperture slightly. So for example, he went from crypto stuff to investing as a whole. And then he even changed the name of his podcast from Off the Chain to the Pump Show or Pump Podcast. And now he just covers business and technology and investing. Then he starts a next podcast with the TikTok dude, and that is about investing for young people. So there's an evolution there, but I definitely agree. And that's something I probably, being frank with myself, when I started this podcast, I interviewed so many different people. So I had like Gary Vee, and I had a nonprofit person, and I had a famous actress, and that was like what I wanted to do, and it fulfilled the purpose at that particular time. But it wasn't necessarily optimal for growing a big audience if that was the goal.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think even if I was to audit my own content creation, I think at times mine can be a little too loose also. Like I think if anything, want to make it more niche. I think the issue with that, right, is we all have broad interests.
Completely.
So like when I think about how does one create? Well, for me, it's a lot of consumption in order to think about what to create, right? And if the stuff I'm putting into my mind or putting into my body isn't just about, like using the Pomp example, NFTs or digital art or crypto, I think what I have to figure out how to train myself to do is, like when I'm reading about media, and then I'm reading about like, companies posting earnings, and then I'm reading about the creator economy, and then I'm reading about like venture capital. It's like I have broad interests, but having broad interests actually doesn't serve well when you're trying to serve a non-broad audience. And so I think it's a question of how do you build discipline around creating content around one or two of the interests, and sometimes actually filtering out some of the stuff you find really interesting, but isn't upholding the contract you've built with your audience for the reason they followed you.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I would add one more thing to that, which is it really comes back to like why you're doing it in the first place, and like what you're optimizing towards, because that's often what I find when people are starting something, whether it's a podcast or something else. They'll ask my advice and they'll say, oh, what would you recommend for someone who's starting? And like the first thing I spend the most time on is like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And like write it down and rank them all and make sure you're honest with yourself. Because yeah, everyone wants to build, if you've got a podcast, yeah, you want 1 million people to listen to you, make lots of money, meet great people, learn yourself, all the different reasons for doing it. But you need to rank them, because that is what's going to dictate how you optimize. So for what you were saying, the goal would be primarily, how do I build an audience that resonates with my content? How do I keep it growing? And naturally, I think for people like you and I, who are probably numbers driven business people in one part of our mind, and then creative people on the other, is this constant battle between, okay, I love writing about this, I love reading about this, but then the numbers are telling me something else, So I think there's this fine line between doing what you truly enjoy doing, and if that's what you're optimizing for, then great, then you're already winning. And then the second part is, if you've got a business, you're trying to grow, then you need to find some balance to that as well.
Yeah, and what I would say is, like, it doesn't just mean you have to write about one thing. Like, even using the example of David Perel, like David writes a lot about the act of writing, but he also writes a lot about like the future of education. He's really into architecture. He writes about architecture. So clearly there is a way to build a heart loyal audience and not just be like so singularly focused. It's just a question of where do you live on the spectrum between broad and the most specific. And I think the general rule of thumb is to live closer to the most specific than the most broad. And the final thing I'll say is that, like, while we're talking about audience building, that is not the sole reason for creating content on the internet. Like, for a lot of people, it's actually not to build an audience. It's not to do anything for other people. It's to create for yourself. It's your own form of expression, that you're just choosing any of these tools as the place to do it. And if you have no intention of building up an audience, like that's not interesting to you, but you just want to create stuff on the internet, then by all means, like, a lot of these recommendations you shouldn't listen to, because the point of it is for you to feel fulfilled for yourself and the things that you're deciding to express yourself around.
100%. No, that resonates a lot, man, because yeah, even in that thread I mentioned before, there was a link to an old post where I was describing that for myself, which was like, I need to enjoy this 2 hours we're recording and however many hours preparing.
Right.
And if there's stuff I don't like for example, I don't mind editing, but I have an editor because it takes up way too much energy and time for me. So I can outsource that part. But for me, it's like, if I enjoy this part and I enjoy the conversation, I learn from it, I build another friend potentially, that is already winning, and everything else from there is upside. So you've already kind of designed the game to win.
Totally. And by the way, you don't have to feel locked into anything forever. Nothing
That's
is
true.
Nothing is a forever decision. And so it's like, if you decide you just want to start creating on Twitter, and you want to start creating on Twitter for your own purpose, like the Mets, you like the Mets, and you like, I don't know, like thinking about transportation and engines, like all these random things, but those are what are interesting to you. And say over time, you start seeing people really engage with like the transportation and engine content, and you end up deciding, wow, like I really like this engagement. I want to do more of it. You're never forbidden from starting to focus your content or build an audience. And so I think that's the big thing also, is as people think about this act of audience building, it's not like an always or never thing. It's a constantly evolving thing that, based on at the time what fulfills you, what makes you happy, and what aligns with your goals, like you can change your mind.
Completely. So just to move on to the next part, I think we could talk all day about that, but really enjoyed that little riff for both of us. On Morning Brew specifically, you've shared the story previously, so we won't do that to death, but there are some key points that I'd love to go into. So the first is, I heard your co-founder talk about, when you're building newsletters or you're looking at new verticals for the company, you're either trying to help someone get better at their job, or it taps into a passion audience or something like that. So I really love those two kind of models to think through. But let's go back like to the beginning, because there's a famous story of you guys doing things that don't scale, which I referenced in that thread we just discussed about before, which was you guys went to business schools and you got people to sign up for the Morning Brew by hand, right? Could you just share a little bit about that context around that story?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, it was simple in the sense that Austin and I had to be very practical in the early days, because we didn't have money and we didn't know a whole lot about business. And so, first of all, we chose email newsletters, not because we were like oracles of media. We chose email newsletters because students use their email a lot, and email newsletters were a really cheap way of creating content. Like a MailChimp account at the time was, I think, $30 a month for us or something. And so we were very practical about the platform we chose, where people are already consuming content and what's affordable. And then when we thought about scaling it, again, it was just like the mental model we used was this kind of like hub and spoke model, right? You think about a bike, the hub is in the middle, the spokes connect to the wheel. That's how we thought about audience, right? Which is, what are the hubs that are connected to all these spokes? The spokes being the people we want to be our readers. So if the spokes are all of like every student at Michigan, where we went to school, who could be a reader of Morning Brew, who are the hubs that bring together all these people in a concentrated manner? And let's focus on those hubs, because it creates leverage where we don't have to go speak to every single spoke. And so what we thought about was like, okay, teachers of business classes, because lectures have between 75 and 500 students. That is a perfect example of a hub and a spoke. Another example was clubs, like organizations on campus that students have self-selected themselves into. If we go to a business club and make an announcement, again, group of 50 to 250 people who have self-selected themselves into showing they care about business. And what we did was we basically just convinced club presidents and teachers to let us come make a 2-minute announcement. The announcement was like the original Brew story, which was like, hey, starting this newsletter, we are making business better and less shitty. It is going to be enjoyable for you, because you're going to spend half of your waking hours when you get out of college in a job, and you should have content that you enjoy, so on and so forth. And we'd always finish with, and look, There's no downside. If you sign up for it and you get it and you don't enjoy it, you can always unsubscribe. So that was always a key piece, was like making people feel like they weren't being tricked. Yeah, they weren't being tricked. There was an easy out and there's literally no downside. And then what we'd say is we're going to pass around a sheet of paper and a pen. You write down your email address. We'll collect it at the end. We'll sign you up. You don't have to worry about putting your email in, and you'll start getting it at 6 a.m. tomorrow. The reason we did that was because we had originally tested saying to people, hey, take out your laptop, type in, go to Chrome, type in morningbrew.com, click on in the email thing, type in your email, hit subscribe. And what you don't realize, just like, because not everyone's like thinking about things from like a user experience perspective for like the most, small things in life. But if you actually think about when we handed someone a piece of paper and a pen, the only step they had to do was grab the pen, write down their email address, and then pass the sheet of paper. The laptop one was like, grab the laptop, open it, go to Chrome, put in email, hit subscribe. And that's like an extra 2 or 3 steps. And what we actually found is that the percentage of a class or a club that would sign up for our newsletter with the laptop or higher tech thing versus the more antiquated piece of paper thing was wildly different. And so we did that because it simply just had a higher conversion rate and we wanted to get as many people as possible signed up. And so then what happened was we went to all the clubs and classes at Michigan. We basically blew through Michigan, got as many people as we could signed up. And then us being practical, we were like, okay, then how do we get more people? And the way we said we get more people is, oh, well, there are a lot of colleges other than Michigan. Let's go to other colleges and find the Austin and Alex at other colleges and incentivize them to do the same exact thing in clubs and classes. And that was like the second step. And then after the second step, when we were like, okay, we have this college thing down, but what we're finding is that there are a lot of people who read Morning Brew that aren't in college. Then the question became, okay, how do we make those people advocates for what we're doing? And that's when we introduced a referral program where everyone who signed up for the brew gets a referral link. If people sign up with their link, they have the chance to earn a referral reward. And that's basically how our growth graduated over time.
Completely. And do you remember like how many subscribers you got to doing that like manual process in the beginning?
I think within Michigan, we got to, I want to say like 1,500. So we got like our first 1,500 subscribers. It was a combination of the business school at Michigan and then like economic, like people in the liberal arts school, like in economics, poli-sci, etc.
Got it. Yeah, that's crazy because now you obviously have millions and there's a lot of steps from there, but that's often the part that a lot of people just skip and they're like, oh, well, how'd you get to your first 10K? And it's like 10K, like to get to 1,000. I always say this, like I worked at Google and YouTube for 7 years. If you took any of my friends who work there at YouTube and asked them to start a YouTube account and get to 1,000 subscribers, I guarantee at least 50 to 70% couldn't do it. And the reason is it's not the knowledge. It's everyone knows, oh, you create useful content, you add the tags, you post it wherever. The hard part is like wanting to keep doing it when you post a video and you get 7 views and your friends are like, what? You got 7 views on your video? And I also think like when you're younger, like and you don't have anything to lose, like you might not even overthink that piece. I don't know if I'm generalizing, but like when I think to some of the things I did as a kid, it was because I didn't even know any better. It was just like, just go and you're 16 years old. Like what else do you know? So I love that, man.
I think it was a combination of, again, going back to like audience building isn't for everyone. You have to enjoy it. Like we just enjoyed the act of building and the act of getting every subscriber. And it's like for so long, we literally would get an email every time there was a new subscriber. And it was like, that was like a little dopamine hit every time that happened. And
that MailChimp one, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then it was also the type of thing where we enjoyed the journey. We didn't want it to stop. So we had to figure out something to continue growing the audience. And we didn't have that many options, right? Like there was no feasible way in our mind to go from 0 to 10,000 or 0 to 1 million, right? Facebook ads weren't an option because we didn't have money. It's like, we didn't know any influencers, so it wasn't like we could get like Gary V or someone to give us a shout out. So that wasn't like an obvious bump. We weren't big yet, so we didn't think like we could get press from like TechCrunch or whatever. So it's like once you start thinking about all the options to grow, it's like naturally you just start landing on the few things you can do to grow and hope that they work.
Completely. So let's go from 1.5K, like you said, to getting to like a 10K. Was that just scaling the college program to other colleges, or was the rewards, the referral program in place by this point?
Yeah, so I would say 1.5K to 10K was mostly just the college ambassador program. And then what I would say was 10K to 100K was kind of like all of the other organic growth things we did. So that was cross promotions with other newsletters. That was us getting press at some point from TechCrunch. That was, us introducing our referral program. It was us actually like starting to spend a little bit of money and spend money on sweepstakes, where we joined sweepstakes, which we quickly learned were just like not going to be valuable for us because the quality of email was so bad. So that's what got us from like 10 to 100 is like all of the different organic things you can do to grow. Like we even for a while we're using Quora as a way to grow, where we would answer business related questions on Quora and always end it with like, for more things like this, go to Morning Brew. And we found that was a valuable way to get subscribers. And then 100K to a million, which happened basically in 12 months, that was doing all of those organic things, having the referral program, which makes every subscriber worth a little bit more than one subscriber, and then introducing paid acquisition, which just started putting a ton of fuel on the fire.
And I love that, man. That's incredible. And I think just that evolution, even if you just extrapolate this from forget newsletters, forget audience businesses, this is a business marketing lesson, right? Like there's things you do in the beginning that you roll up your sleeves. Airbnb called up people and turned up at the host's apartments and spoke to people face to face and create cereal, but that's a different thing. And then there's the next stage, which is really proving to yourself and refining that product and getting feedback from people and continue to grow mostly organically and like the growth levers. And then the ads and stuff can definitely help scale. So by 100,000, it's working. Like people like this enough that there's 100,000 people. Let's go into the ads part, because I put this in that thread I shared with you. A lot of people just disregard ads, and I think it comes from this purist, it's my opinion, but a lot of creators or creative people just have this pure this mentality of like, well, if I create something great, it will spread and people will hear about it. It's almost like selling out or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I'm the opposite, where like I've seen like my job for 10, 15 years has been helping people scale through ads for a long time. So I've seen like people who you've never heard of go from, 1 million to 10 million, or from 1 to 100 because of paid ads, because they work incredibly well. But I think the time to do that is key. Like if you try to do it in the beginning and you don't have anything that's actually worthwhile promoting and you haven't refined the product, it's probably too early. But you guys had figured that out. So when did you decide that paid ads was the right time? Was there like a moment that you said, okay, it's working and this has happened, now let's scale up?
It was once we started monetizing the business.
Got you.
So we didn't start spending on ads when we raised our small amount of money. Like we had raised a small round in 2017. We raised $750,000, and we basically used that money to start hiring people, right? We started, like Austin and I started taking small salaries. We hired our first writers. We hired our first growth person. It was basically to hire the team that would complete this cycle that every media asset goes through, which is great content, growth, monetization. Like that is the cycle of any piece of content you create. And so we hired people from our fundraise in order to complete those steps of the cycle. When we actually decided to spend on paid acquisition was when we actually started selling ads. When we actually started monetizing the business through advertisements, that's when we were like, okay, now we're giving off profit, and we can do a few things with that profit. We can either reinvest it into hiring more people to get the flywheel spinning, or we can reinvest it into growing our audience faster. And we did both of those things. But we felt comfortable starting to spend on ads because we said, hey, we have now proved that this audience we're building up is not just quality to us, but people are actually paying to get in front of them. We wouldn't have spent on ads before that because it would have felt like we were just like, it was a leaky bucket where we were, getting we were getting people to come into the bucket, which is our readers. But then if there's a hole in the bucket and it's going out, then there's no point to spend money to get the bucket to fill faster. So we had to know that people would be willing to pay to get in front of this audience, or else it didn't make sense to pay on ads. And so we started spending on paid acquisition, I believe in like 2018, right around 2018. And so it was like 2018 to like where we are now has really been defined as like hyper growth period at Morning Brew. And it all started honestly with starting to spend on paid acquisition.
Yeah. I'll just tie in something that we talked about earlier, which was rented platforms, right? There's a reason they're called rented platforms is because often nowadays you kind of need to pay to play on most of the platforms to get enough reach. So even if you've got, 10,000 people following you on Instagram, you're not reaching 100% of those people with your posts.
Totally.
And so it makes sense and it can really work well. So let's go into that a little bit. So you mentioned like email swaps. Were there other types of paid? Was that like a paid thing or was that just more of a swap?
So we've done both. We
Okay.
started by doing just like unpaid swaps. So we did cross promotions with everyone from like Dave Pell's Next Draft to the CB Insights newsletter. And what we found, similar to what you were talking about, is these smaller audiences, but that were hyper engaged, were incredible growth drivers for the business. Like the only reason that we faced any challenge with them is there are only so many scaled newsletters to cross promote with. So it's more of a challenge around like fragmentation of the channel rather than anything else. But yeah, like we did these cross promotions with using those two examples, CB Insights and Dave Pell. And we saw so many more subscribers come through that than like when we partnered with like a large news organization that literally got us like 2 subscribers. So we found that very helpful. And then what we started to do is we started to buy paid ads in other email newsletters as well. And so that became a really valuable strategy where some of our highest quality subscribers were coming through email newsletters. We were spending, tens of thousands of dollars a month on advertising in email newsletters. And again, the only issue with that became scalability. You run in an email newsletter enough times and you will burn out the audience. It's like one of the powers of social platforms is it just takes longer to burn through audiences. But that was always our focus in growing, whether it was paid organically, which is not just how do we acquire subscribers, but how do we acquire the right subscribers, the people who will open at least 5 of their first 10 newsletters. And like that was always the barometer for how we define success and where we want to optimize putting money towards.
Got you. Yeah, that's brilliant. Did you ever try programmatic email ads, which were like buying within multiple email?
Did not work well.
Did not work for you. Do you remember what you used to do that?
I think it was Taboola or Outbrain. Okay. It was one of the two.
Got it. Yeah, because there's some platforms I've used in the past, not for my podcast, but for other companies I work with, where like for SaaS, for example, it can work really well. And the benefit of that is if I'm subscribed to Morning Brew, TechCrunch, The Hustle, and a bunch of others, it will make sure I'm not being served the same ad like 5 times because It's got my email address.
I think part of it is also you see success with it when you drive really cheap clicks to a piece of content. But for us, we were driving people to a landing page. And so I think that was confusing for people because they got to this landing page and all the information they had about Morning Brew was like the headline they saw in the ad copy and then like the headline on the landing page. I think it's a worthwhile exercise as Morning Brew creates more website content to think about if we drive people to that piece of content first and then try to just maximize the conversion rate on that piece of content.
On that page.
Could it work better?
That makes sense. Awesome, man. No, that's super helpful. And then last question on that is, what about like I think a lesson you mentioned there is email grew through email, and I've heard other people say podcasts go on other podcasts, which is a big thing. But were there other platforms like paid social, even Google search, YouTube, any of these sorts of platforms that did help at all?
I would say that there was a period of time where we were getting really cheap subscribers from Snapchat and Instagram. And there was just a piece of ad creative that we ended up figuring out that did very well, where it was basically a fake text message conversation between a friend, like two friends, where it was like one friend was like, so like and such thing happened in the business world yesterday, and the person responds like, how do you know that? Like where do you find that out? And the person was like, oh, it's this newsletter I get every day. And basically through the conversation, they said how they got smarter because of reading Morning Brew, and that ad creative performed incredibly well, which I think just lends credibility to, in a world of ads and abundance, like in the attention economy, it's like having great creative is like one of your only hopes of standing out. It's like get in front of the right audience with the right creative. And so it's like, it shows the importance of quality creative. And then I would say relatively recently, like influencer marketing has worked really well for us as well. Like YouTube influencer marketing has been a really strong channel.
That's interesting. Yeah, because again, back to that original lesson you talked about, like the depth of engagement with people on YouTube, if they're the right sort of YouTubers, is so deep, because you're not listening, you're not just liking a couple tweets, you're watching a 15-20 minute Ali Abdal productivity video, or like whatever else it is. That's good to know. It definitely makes sense.
And what I would say is, like, to me, cross promotions are always going to be a valuable marketing channel. It's just the stakes get bigger, right? So it's like in the early days for the brew, it was like with other email newsletters, and maybe like those newsletters are too small for us to get enough subscribers now, but maybe like the next version is like us doing, I don't know, a cross promotion with like the MBA, where Morning Brew creates a personal finance course for MBA players in partnership. And so then the MBA markets it to their whole audience. So it's like, I think it's like cross promotion graduates, and it's like you constantly are going up on this ladder and thinking about who are the other audience, like brands that have audiences that are of relatively similar size. And so I think cross promotions are always a valuable thing. It's like, even I'm thinking about for my podcast, like, one, how do I cross promote, right? So like, how do I do feed drops in other podcasts? How do I guest on a lot of podcasts? Because to your point, like podcast to podcast cross promotion, like channel cross promotion, is always really valuable. But then also, how do you build in cross promotion into actually your content? So just to give you the example, it's like my podcast, it's Founders Journal, 15 minutes talking about like the lessons behind the scenes of building a business. It's like, what if I decide, instead of just doing my own journal entries, what if I get other people? Like I do celeb shots, where I do guest journals, where I get Gary Vee to do a 15-minute journal of like something big that he's learning behind the scenes of building VaynerX. And then he's going to absolutely promote that, because it's 15 minutes of him talking about like his business and what he's learning. And so I think there's an interesting thing to always think about, like, how are you thinking about marketing and cross promotion when ideating on the content you want to, evolve within your business?
Yeah, that's a great point. I've also found on the podcast side, we'll go into podcasts a little deeper in a second, just from my experience too. If you just look at like the Netflix or series model, like when you start one episode, you kind of get the preview from the last episode, and it kind of leaves you on a cliffhanger. And that's not the same for an interview style podcast. It might be for a narrative one. But even for me, something I've added in the last year is a lot of the time in my intro, where I'm introducing a summary of what we discussed, to kind of provide like that context up front, so people aren't waiting an hour to figure it out. The last like 15-20 seconds, I'll say, and make sure you check out this related episode or last week's episode. And that just means that someone hears it in the beginning, and if that's the first time they're listening to the podcast, they're hopefully going to go and check out something else as well after that.
Totally. And two thoughts on that. One is, I think that's something that Sahil Bloom, who you were talking about, does really well with his tweet threads, is like you can be self-referential in almost any type of content. Like we even do that within Morning Brew, right? We'll link to other stuff we've created in the past. Is he in his tweet threads will, when he's talking about some concept, if that concept, it like is referencing a previous concept he's talked about, he'll always reference that past thread as well. And you just create this, you force people in their experience to stay within your ecosystem. And so I think like that's a really powerful thing to be able to do.
So just one other thing I wanted to talk to you about is, now you mentioned those 4 chapters of the brew and how you're now in this media, taking over the world stage of this media company in the business side anyway. I've also just thought about how powerful the signals are from your newsletter, right? So whether that is, you've got 2.5 million people or whatever it was getting the email, 1 million plus opening it every day. Just being able to see the signals of what people click, whether that's an ad or types of content. I always thought of it as like when I worked at Google, we could pull the raw data of search query data, which you can do externally with keyword tools and Google Trends, but it's indexed. Whereas internally, you get like the raw numbers. So it's just slightly more signal. And I just always thought that was the most incredible perk, like because you're basically able to understand it's like the world's biggest focus group. And similarly for you guys, when it comes from the content side, there aren't many people in the world who have a bigger email list than you do. So I'm curious, as you think about that 4th chapter and maybe the 5th, are you guys thinking of using some of those signals, or have you, even in interesting ways, to inform the next verticals you go into?
So it's a great question, and that's exactly what we're thinking about. I would say we're evolving from what I would call intuitive growth to data-informed growth. Like when we've grown in the past, it's all just been because we think it makes sense, which is not a bad way to grow, especially when, Austin and I were like consumers of the content. We've generally found that if we think we would like this, other people would like it. But to your point, there's such an opportunity in us seeing what people click on, like what they engage with, what they ask for when they email us, and using that as a way to inform what we're launching in the future. So, I mean, I'll give you the example, like we're going into personal finance content. We're going into that because we directionally saw things. Like we directionally saw that a lot of people click on personal finance content. And we directionally saw that like readers emailed us saying, we would love this from you. And we as a team said, helping to inform how people save money is something that will be really helpful to people. But I think to your point, you can take it a next step where if you bring like rigor to and structure to the data we're collecting, we can really see valuable insights that are not just about the specific themes, but even within the specific themes, like what structure of content works well, like all of these different things. And so to your point, it's like we are building out our kind of growth and audience development function in a way more meaningful way, where actually we just brought on someone to run the growth and audience development orgs. And one of their biggest priorities is going to be wrangling our data. So it's like, how do we actually structure our data in a way where we can learn basically 2 things, like audience engagement and audience health? Like, how do we learn what type of content our audience wants so that it can inform our product pipeline? And how can we learn our audience's appetite for the brew? Like how often they're opening, when they're deciding to unsubscribe, why they're unsubscribing, like in terms of just understanding like the lifetime value of our audience and how does that change over time? And are there automated emails we can send 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks into you reading that will actually pull out the tail of you unsubscribing? Like we haven't done any of those things yet we have all of that data. It just needs to be organized and analyzed in the right way. And so, I mean, you hit the nail on the head that is a huge priority over the next, 6 to 12 months.
I love it, man. Yeah, it's really cool to see because I think you two are both so, like you've got that intuitive skill that's already helped you get in one direction. And now if you combine that with the data side, because then neither side is completely perfect. You need both, ideally, long run, right? So the fact that you're getting that in place is really cool. You mentioned podcasting there before, so let's talk a little bit about that, because as you grow into the 4th and 5th chapter, I think podcasting is definitely a part of that. You've already got a few podcasts part of the brew. How are you finding that whole world? Because one, you're doing it yourself as an individual, not just an exec at the company. So you're getting a feel for the craft of it. But also the growth side of it is very different to a blog, text, Twitter, email. Totally. So love to go into that, how you're finding that.
Yeah. So where to start? I would say multimedia in general is a really exciting place for us to explore because for a few reasons. One, in thinking about the user, people don't just consume content in newsletter. People consume content on social. They consume video content. They consume audio content. And so if we are saying we want to empower the modern business leader through engaging in accessible content, and we don't want to force people to go where we tell them to, we have to exist in places that they are going to want to consume the content. So one is like, just from an audience perspective, we have to be in these places because that's where our audience is consuming content. The second is in the same way that when we launched our newsletter, we said that legacy business content was in text form, was dense, was dry, and wasn't getting people excited. I think the same thing can be said in terms of multimedia content. Like there aren't a ton of audio experiences or video experiences or social experiences in business that really resonate with the modern business leaders. I think you have a lot of like FinTwit and meme accounts, but those aren't like brands. There aren't like brands that have effectively done that. And the way that I think about it is, how do we take a lot of the proven learnings from like legacy business? So like CNBC has, 24 hours a day of content and programming. How do we take some of the things that have really worked well there, whether it's their talk around the markets, whether it's Shark Tank, whether it's emphasis on small business and entrepreneurship? How do we take those disciplines and reprogram that into the digital age in a multimedia environment? And how do we do that where people have proven in the creator economy and the multimedia world that people identify with people? How do we take Morning Brew's brand and put it at the top, but allow ourselves to build sub brands around individuals who people on the internet will way more resonate with? So I think that's the highest level thought. The other is that, just from a monetization perspective, if we want to build a bigger business, we aren't going to always be able to just sell newsletter ads. Like, big advertisers want opportunities to get in front of audiences, not just in a newsletter and not just in a text format. Like, advertisers are fiending for high quality video content. Like, that is something that they just really want. And then the final piece is growth is totally different. So like, we are having to learn right now what it means to grow podcasts, what it means to grow social, because we haven't focused on that at all in the last 5 years. And I think that's really exciting. And it just means we have to make the right hires who know how to do this really well. From my own experience of working on my own podcast, Founders Journal, it's interesting because it started as a side project that I was doing not related to the brew. And now it's becoming a franchise within Morning Brew. And the reason I love it is it allows me to document the entrepreneurial experience in a way that I think sits somewhere between hustle porn, where like, people tell you to work really hard and shoot for the stars and all these things, and like self-help, which I find can be very disconnected with reality. And my whole thing is like, how do I connect mentality? So things like insights, ideas, strategies, feelings, how do I attach those things to the actual act of building? Because at the end of the day, all that matters is how you think through things to build, but how do you do so in a specific and relatable way? And my view was use Morning Brew as the case study, the always on case study, to attach these strategies that I'm thinking about, these tactics, these feelings that I'm feeling, et cetera. But what I will say is it's really hard to grow. Like, the podcast is still small. I think last month was our biggest month. We got 35,000 downloads last month. That's like still very small relative to the brew.
What else you're doing. Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. But it's moving in the right direction. And I feel like we are learning the type of content that works. And also we have ideas for how do we amplify the growth of it. And going back to like owned audiences, the beauty of email, at least, is while email is not open like a social platform, discoverability and shareability is harder. There's at least shareability in email, which is like, we built the referral program into it. With podcasts, discoverability is horrible and shareability is even worse. And so I think what that just makes you think about in podcasting is, what are other levers you have to pull to get people to know about your podcast? Because it's not going to be it's not going to be a referral program. You're not going to be able to gamify the experience of sharing. It's going to have to be other things like appearing on people's podcasts, doing cross promotions, doing a lot of social content to leverage the discoverability of social to drive people down to your podcast, leveraging things like Clubhouse that are audio first. So I think it's not a different approach, right? Or like, it's not a different mentality, right? It's still like the hub and spoke model and thinking about this movement between rented and owned audiences, but it is just a different approach because podcasts have their challenges that email doesn't have.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, man. And the way I think of it is like the macro is always the same, whether that meaning like how to promote something doesn't change really. Like you have to have something great. There are certain channels you can attack. You can spread through existing listeners or readers, but it's the micro that is a little bit more tactical, which is, okay, there's a very specific thing with email and there's this growth thing we can do here and stuff like that versus a podcast. And obviously from my point of view as well, that's why I included that in the write-up I shared with you. Like YouTube for me is a really interesting place because a lot of people just completely ignore it. And the truth is because it's really hard. Like it's really tiring to do both. And especially at a level that you're trying to create something that is of good quality, where you filtered for the noise, all the different things that come with creating video, audio content. Go ahead.
To that point, I think that's why I feel like there's going to always be, or like the amount of time in the life of YouTube that there's going to be opportunity on YouTube for creators is just going to always be longer than say like Twitter or Facebook or whatever it is because the number of steps behaviorally to create content is just harder, right? Like that was the great unlock of like TikTok brought video and audio content creation closer to text, but it is still harder. Typing on a keyboard is way easier than shooting a video, feeling good about it, making any edits that make it watchable for people. And so I think because anytime you add friction into like behavior, it is going to just increase the amount of time that there's opportunity before it becomes saturated.
Completely. No, that's a great point, man. One other point on the podcast side, you've shared previously the 3 types of content that work really well for the Founders Journal. So the first one was timely news hooks. The second was service content. The third was vulnerability. So I'd love to go into each one of those from your experience. You've noticed that these do the best for you. Could you elaborate a little bit more on timely news hooks? What's an example of that?
So it's literally my episode that came out today. It's about Twitter's Analyst Day. So it's about Twitter recently had an Analyst Day where Jack Dorsey talked about a few things. Well, actually a lot of things because it was an 8-hour presentation, but a few of the things that are notable is he talked about, first of all, addressing people's criticism that Twitter has moved too slow for too long. And then the second that he talked about is like these new products that are being introduced at Twitter. And that's what I mean by a timely news hook. Because it's about recent news related to Twitter, timeliness creates urgency. In the same way Morning Brew is around business news, it creates urgency for people to read it because there is a short shelf life on that content being valuable. And so what I've tried to do is take the timeliness, which is Twitter's product announcements, and then connect it to like the goal of Founders Journal, which is giving business builders the strategies, frameworks, ideas, thoughts for being a more effective builder. So what I did is I took these product announcements and I try to break down how I think about Twitter's strategy moving forward based on these announcements and what is the lens I look at business strategy to assess Twitter's business, but also to assess Morning Brew's business.
Got it. Yeah. And I think that to add to that, it also is normally something new. So a lot like the Twitter side, they're talking about super followers or whatever they're called.
Yep.
And like monetization and Twitter Spaces. People who just hear that, they're like, oh, what's Twitter Spaces? There's a reason for them to go and learn. And there's something for you to teach them essentially in a quick way. Obviously, the flip side to that is it's more timely, so therefore it's not evergreen. So there's a balance of content.
Exactly. Yeah, I think what it's really about is what is like the pattern or like the shape of traffic that you want, right? Do you want something that starts like a surge and then quickly comes down? Or do you want something that's like more of just like a linear interest over time, right? If you talk about like the Twitter announcement, or I did one recently on like Clubhouse, that will be interesting to people for like a week. And then there will be so much other content saturation that they're not going to remember to listen to that episode. So you'll see this spike in listenership, and then it probably won't get a ton of long tail downloads. Whereas when I come out with an episode around like audience building, right, this funnel that I've talked you through, like my view is that there will be a very long tail around this concept, not only because as people scroll through my Founders Journal feed, they'll see something that is more frameworky and evergreen, and they'll feel the ability to click on it whenever, even 10 years down the road. But also, to me, it gives, from a marketing perspective, you have more of an ability to work with evergreen content for a longer period of time. Because when anyone talks about audience building on Twitter or in other places, I can now reference that or like reply with that episode because it hasn't decayed in value at all.
Completely. So that was the second one, which is like service content, which you described. So it's more evergreen and it's often frameworks or something that might last for a little bit longer. So go ahead.
And I think a great example of service content comes back to this idea that you had mentioned before, which is like, in general, content should do one of two things. It should solve a problem or it should fulfill a passion. If it doesn't do one of the two, I don't know why people will read it. So that's the first point. The second point is an example of someone who does service content really well or mixes service content with timeliness is Ben Thompson with Stratechery. Because like Ben Thompson has come up with these theories over time as he analyzes businesses. And it's this self-fulfilling prophecy of getting more interest in it because people start using the language he uses for these new theories he comes up with. So for example, like aggregator theory, this idea of like the aggregation of a bunch of content creators. So like on Facebook is an aggregator in the sense that Facebook's not creating the content. It is aggregating millions of people to create content on its behalf. And Facebook is simply the brand that is thought of when people go to the destination to consume content. The beauty of what Ben Thompson does is he writes a piece on aggregator theory. People read it and they're like, wow, it's fascinating. But then like every week, forever, Ben Thompson will write a timely piece and reference aggregator theory because it's such an all-encompassing theory that it constantly has oxygen to be marketed.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, I think he's definitely one of the best examples of that. And the third one you mentioned is vulnerability, which I think people who listen to my show will know. I think I have all elements I have included some of those three elements, but I try to do more like the second one, which is more like actionable stuff long term that you can always come back to. I'd say there's been more vulnerability in like recent times where I go behind the mind and share my own stuff as well with people. But could you give an example of what that looks like for you?
Yeah. A recent episode that I did on imposter syndrome. So I recorded an episode on imposter syndrome, basically this feeling of being a fraud, this feeling of not being qualified to do the job that you're doing and to at some point be found out and someone asks you to see the door on the way out. And, you know, first of all, it's something that a ton of people experience. I watched a TED Talk about the CEO of Atlassian who spoke about it. Sheryl Sandberg has spoken about it. Maya Angelou has spoken about it. Like, it's a very common thing. But I think there's a few reasons. That episode, by the way, is the number one performing episode of any Founders Journal I've done of the 175 episodes. And I think it's because it sits at this intersection of what are things that are really emotionally provoking that people experience. So there's a lot of pent up anxiety from it. It intersects with what are things that people don't speak about. And if you can get the middle of that Venn diagram of things that people don't speak about, but causes them a ton of emotional tension or anxiety, I think always that will be of interest to people because your vulnerability will help release some of that emotional tension. And so when I spoke about my experience with imposter syndrome over the last 5 years and when I felt most like a fraud and what those specific thoughts are of like, am I pulling my weight as a co-founder? How do I grow with the business as the business grows? Like all of these things, people seem to really resonate with that. And, you know, another example was I did an episode about losing my dad and I tried to do it again through the lens of like a business builder. So I kind of talked about through the loss of my dad, how did that change things about me that made me a more intentional builder? Like how did it actually change my mindset? But it's like it's not a coincidence that those 2 episodes, I got the most email replies from the audience sharing their own experiences, because people finally felt the permission to talk about things that they hadn't spoken about before.
Yeah, I listened to both of those, and they were both great. So
Thank you.
well, first of all, thanks for sharing those, because that's definitely super personal. And I would say what I'm finding the beauty of podcasts are that you can have like direct access to someone's brain, right? And their thoughts and their experiences and their feelings. And there aren't that many people that share as openly as maybe we both try to anyway.
Yep.
And I think that's why even another example is personal finance, right? For generations, we've been told, don't talk about your pay, it's rude. Like there's all these rules about money that we kind of grow up listening to.
Totally.
And now if you go on YouTube, some of the biggest YouTubers are the ones showing their earnings. They're explaining how they're investing. They're literally opening up their Shopify account and showing you
and
how they've done
love
it. Completely. And that's like, I think here to stay. I think the transparency, there's pros and cons obviously, but overall the transparency I think is a great thing. But being able to feel comfortable enough to share vulnerably is difficult. So
I mean, I feel like this entire notion of build in public, right, which is becoming bigger, is all this, right? It's all about people love hearing about the journey, not just the endpoint. And also building in public is hopefully just like a really authentic take on building, where people see the great stuff and the wins and the celebrations, and they engage with that because they feel like you're authentically giving them everything, because you also share some of the tough stuff that's happening, and they engage with that as well. And it's almost like for people who are able to do it or feel comfortable doing it, it's a liberating thing, because it almost makes it feel like very little is off limits and you're still going to have support from your audience.
Yeah, 100%, man. And one of the nuances I'll add there is building in public doesn't mean showing literally everything. It means showing what you feel comfortable showing and is useful. And I think, and that obviously is a spectrum for people,
Exactly.
But like just making sure it's authentic. You're not trying to deceive people. And just not only show the stuff when it's good is like a key thing here, because most people don't do the other side where something messed up and you don't actually share that as well.
There have to be rules around it, right? Like I would never share something publicly about a person that I wouldn't share with other people, right? Like if there's a one-on-one conversation I had with someone, and I knew that if I knew in that conversation they actually were open to me sharing some of the learnings of that, great, maybe that's content I could put out. But if I know they wouldn't feel comfortable me talking about that to other people in the business, then I'm definitely not going to talk about it publicly to the entire internet.
100%, man. So yeah, thanks for going into that on the podcast. We'll come on to a couple of those things in the last part of the show. But the last question I have on this side is the future of monetization, because I think this is something that's interesting. It's the third part of your funnel, and we're seeing some really interesting things. If you're listening to this episode for the first time, I'd say go and check out the convo I had with Jack Butcher for 2 hours on this as well. But I'd love to get your take on some interesting examples of people monetizing in unique ways. So I have some prompts if we need to go that route, but like if anything comes to mind first, we can start with that.
Yeah, there's a few. I mean, it's just interesting to think about. It's like the way that the internet is kind of, what I would say is like collapsing this funnel, where it's putting monetization so close to audience building, is it has basically made anything fair game for monetizing your audience based on who your audience is and the type of value you give them. So it's like, I mean, one example I think of is I was speaking to this guy, Rashad Tabakawala. He was the chief growth officer at Publicis, one of the large ad agencies. And he's a really just like wise person who spent 40 years in advertising and marketing. But his funnel is really fascinating, right? Where he looks at like there's basically 3 ways you can interact with humans: one-to-one, one-to-some, and one-to-many. And his one-to-many is basically his audience building. So that's his newsletter, that's his content on LinkedIn. And all of his one-to-many fuels his one-to-some and it's his one-to-one. One to some for him is advisory roles, sitting on boards and or sorry, not boards. That's one to one. One to some is like him giving talks, like him public speaking, going to Google or wherever and talking about the future of media, marketing, and advertising. That's his one to some. And then his one to one is a combination of whether it be executive coaching or sitting in as advisor for a company, advising like the CEO or the co-founders. And so for him, his funnel is his one-to-many content creation is what gets the eyeballs of a really senior group of people that then ask him to either do public speaking or to actually be an advisor to their company. And it's really interesting how he thinks about it, because he almost thinks of like his content creation as like the loss leader, where he's not really monetizing it, but it's this loss leader to get pretty high LTV customers at like the public speaking level and wildly high LTV customers at like the advisory level, where he's actually potentially getting equity in companies. So that's a really interesting example for me.
For sure.
Another example would be Morgan Housel. So Morgan Housel, who creates a lot of content around like the economy, money, his ability to build.
And he's got a book too, right? Psychology of Money.
Oh, and to me, that's one of the ways that he's monetized.
Oh,
right?
got it. Yeah, for sure.
Like he's built up this huge audience because he creates great content on Twitter and his blog around economics, money, personal finance, etc. One that I would say that led him to have a job opportunity at a venture capital firm, because he is effectively just like the one person PR and marketing engine for the company. Because now when people want to read Morgan's content, his blog posts are on the VC's website. And it's also led to book deals where he released this book, Psychology of Money. And to me, so much of the marketing firepower that made that book what seems like a success is because he has this massive audience that he built up on the internet. Those are very non-traditional ways of monetizing your audience. Like most people think of obviously some form of subscription in a paid newsletter on Substack, or they think about advertising through just like brand deals, or what has become even more common, or like more common recently, is creating classes or courses, like different cohort-based courses. And so it's just fascinating to me. It's like there are just so many ways to possibly monetize, from advertisements and subscriptions to courses to books to getting advisory positions or new roles at companies. Like I think Sahil in a lot of ways is playing the long game because he's not monetizing anything, but I think he's seeing the value of the relationships he's gotten through Twitter and potentially the career opportunities that it opens. And so, yeah, it's like, this is why I'm so excited about the creator economy. There are more tools than ever before to build an audience, and there are more tools than ever before to monetize an audience. I think the only thing that's going to hold back people from being creators that monetize themselves and work, on their own or with a small team, is not everyone necessarily has the risk appetite to do that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Would you also say not everyone has the talent for it as well?
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
I guess like anything, but I think especially when something's so public and there's like a global market of attention where you can kind of look at the best thing of the best. Yeah, that's probably part of it too.
For sure. I think where people won't end up being, creators as businesses is either where they don't want to from a risk perspective. They don't enjoy doing that. Like they don't enjoy creating content, or the content they create is just not good enough. I think the opportunity that exists is not only that there are more monetization opportunities than ever before, and the ability to build audiences better than ever before, but also there's just like more things to write about than ever before, because this is like the whole 1,000 True Fans, Legion passion economy thing, which is like, as the internet has just unlocked niches, because people now have the ability to find content around the things they're really specifically interested in, is that there's just still, it's not all of the opportunity. It's like the oil or diamonds in the ground. It's not even close to having been tapped out. It's more about do the people want to do the digging, and are they good at digging? But there's still a ton of oil left to extract as it relates to things on the internet to cover that people will enjoy and pay for.
One last one I'll mention on the monetization front is D2C, obviously, like creating physical products. But an interesting version of this recently was Mr. Beast, the really big YouTuber. He created Mr. Beast, is it Mr. Beast Burgers? Or a burger chain, essentially, but it's like
Mr. Beast Burger.
Mr. Beast Burger, exactly. And it was essentially like a ghost kitchen where they created an app and they created a network of delivery points. And I don't know the numbers, but I just thought it was an incredibly interesting example of essentially people with an audience taking ownership. And that's the bigger macro point. Like even before the creator economy and Twitter was around, we had celebrities endorsing brands, right? And now the difference is a celebrity like Jay-Z doesn't just endorse the brand, he becomes the brand and he owns a part of it that he then sells to the biggest luxury brand in the world, 10 years later or whatever. Yep. And I think that's the interesting thing for me is like people are understanding we need, if you truly care about financial freedom anyway, you need ownership, you need to have some upside and not just be the endorsement.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And I think I was talking to David Perel about this, but like the monetization part of the audience funnel actually is more nuanced, where it's like, it's not just a single type of monetization. It's not just making money today. It's also building up equity. And I think that's what we're seeing people start to do. And I think, it's made me just think about like, there are really interesting examples of creators launching businesses where they are the first marketing channel for that business and they get to build up equity in that business. I can't remember who it was, but it was another big creator that I know hosts a podcast with Dave Portnoy from Barstool. Dave does like an influencer. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know who you're talking about, but I've forgotten his name too.
I can't remember his name, but I believe he launched, I think, an energy drink also. But to me, there's this really interesting thing of like, how can creators be supported by a great operational SWAT team to launch a business? And it makes me almost think about like, why back in the day with the examples that you used, why didn't celebrities launch businesses? Like, I mean, you've seen some examples of it, right? You've seen like, George Clooney with his tequila brand, and you've seen some examples of that. Yeah. But like, to me, it's like, why wouldn't everyone start doing that?
I think my opinion is there were two things. One, I think there's more leverage now because previously audience was concentrated and now it's fragmented. So previously you had 5 TV channels and then like 3 radio shows or whatever. And so those people, even though they were celebrities, they didn't have a way to get attention directly to the people. I think that was one part. And then secondly, I think because of information sharing and more transparency, we're seeing more examples of it happening. And then other people can say, oh, cool, well, I've seen Jay-Z do it. I've seen XYZ do it. I can go and follow that kind of playbook. But maybe, there's probably more to it than that. But that's probably what I think
that's a good point, which is like social media, you have control. While you don't own the audience, you have the controls of connecting with your audience whenever you want to. Back in the day, you didn't have the luxury of choosing when your audience saw you. Yeah,
you'd have to go and like or you'd either have to do some crazy publicity stunt or like ask to be on a TV show or whatever, on the news or whatever.
Interesting.
But super interesting, man. Well, listen, man, we've done a bunch on the creator side. I think that's so deep. I think there's a lot to unpack there and a lot of actionable stuff. The last part of the show is called Behind the Mind, where we go into some of things that I've read about that you've shared, and we can just discuss some of those ideas. A few of these came from, I think you were doing the Ship 30 for 30 thing with Dickie Bush. So you were sharing a little essay every day, an atomic essay, whatever it's called. And I thought that was super cool. Like your ones were really good. Like they had some cool ideas in them. And I love the way that you were able to share them. So I'll link to that in the description, show notes, so people can check out the thread of all the different things. But yeah, actually just curious, like what was that experience like for you? Because it looked like something that you were trying to commit to a writing habit yourself.
Yeah. So what I'll say is building any writing habit is really difficult. I mean, it's why I ended up starting Founders Journal as my podcast, because for years I wanted to journal and I couldn't build up that habit. So I said, maybe if I hold myself accountable to an audience, I'll start doing it and keep a habit, which has been true. But Ship 30 for 30 was great. I think, again, I proved to myself how hard a habit is for writing. I wasn't able to make it all 30 days. I think I made it like 19 or 20 days, which I still feel good about, but it just proved how difficult every day setting aside 45 minutes to an hour to write good content is. And I think that even in my own exploration was the hard part, is like, because I self-edit as I write, it takes me a long time, because I don't just like throw stuff on paper with like, improper grammar or like half-baked thoughts. It's like my brain forces me to work through the thoughts and then get the finished ideas on paper, which is a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing, which means I probably don't need to do as many rounds of edits. It's a bad thing because it just takes too long. And I think there's actually something like freeing about just like this kind of cathartic release of words. But I really enjoyed it because it forced me, it gave me structure and regularity around being creative. Like every day I had to come up with a creative new idea around our business, which I really enjoyed.
Yeah, and I think the key thing for me in any habit building activity is accountability, for someone like me anyway. I think for most people, but there's an element of, like, I'll use my example, the podcast. I haven't missed a Wednesday since I said publicly I'm doing it every Wednesday, and that is really hard to do, especially at the scale and the level of like editing and stuff. Like even last night I was preparing for this interview most of the day, and then last night I like finish and edit myself because my editor's now out, right? So, and I haven't found a new person in the meantime, so I had to like brush up my old skills. But it's just one of those things, like if I didn't have that deadline and accountability to people saying I'm going to do this every Wednesday, I would have just said, I'm going to skip it this week because no one's going to notice anyway.
And that's what I appreciated about Ship for 30 for 30 is they baked like two aspects of accountability in there. One was everyone was in a Slack channel and you were put into a smaller group to share your essay each day. And so the whole idea was like, not that there was public shaming, but you felt a responsibility to post just like everyone else. And then the other thing was, for at least the first cohort, I don't think they do this anymore. The first cohort was, it's going to cost you $50 or $100, and you get back that money if you ship all 30 of them. If you don't ship all 30, your money is going to be donated to charity.
Oh, that's smart. Actually, I love that. Yeah, that's a good idea. No, and I think you can apply this to anything. Like even it doesn't have to be about writing. It could be you're trying to do the 100 push-up challenge that people are doing on Instagram, or like I've just hired. Well, next week I'll have a remote coach for like physical activity stuff, which is the first time I'm doing that, and that's literally just because I want to have the accountability. Because at the moment, I'm honest, I'm not being accountable to myself. It's too easy to like not do anything,
And I mean, to me, it's not like a good or a bad thing whether you can hold yourself accountable or not. Like some people can, some people can't. But it's more about just understanding yourself and understanding what is reasonable and what will hold you accountable to doing something that's reasonable. And what I mean by that is when I went to do Ship 30 for 30 and why I liked it is like, it was a reasonable ask, which is to write every day for 30 days. If I put down, I have to write every day for the next 6 months, it's not reasonable because I've proven to myself that I can do it for 3 days, let alone, a couple hundred days. And so I think it has to be a reasonable ask of yourself where it deeply impacts your lifestyle in a way that you create all these changes that it just add friction to you building the habit. So it has to be reasonable. And that's like, how do you hold yourself accountable to being reasonable? And whether that's you holding yourself accountable or someone else holding you accountable, to me, it actually kind of doesn't matter as long as you know what you need.
So I'm going to pull out one of your atomic essays and talk through an idea. And the reason I'm choosing this one, it was the micro Shark Tank idea you talked about. And we'll go into what that is in a second. But genuinely, I had a very similar idea. And, that happens. Like, it's not completely original, but I think we might have come at it from different angles. So I thought it would be fun for us just to brainstorm what this idea could look like. And so first of all, do you remember this idea? I think you were talking about the Shark Tank of the next generation essentially will allow
Yes.
viewers to invest in the companies that sharks invest in too. And I thought this makes so much sense. It's like other trends. There's engagement with the audience. There's live stuff going on. There's so many cool parts to this. So like, I'm curious how you would potentially like launch something like this if you were doing it for fun.
Yeah, so I think what I would do first is I'd probably launch it without getting people to invest, because to me that's like another layer of complexity. Because there's more regulations around that, and there's regulations that allow it to happen now, but I think it just makes it harder. Like there's regulation A, there's regulation CF, and basically there are regulations that have allowed non-accredited investors to invest in startups or like, growth equity size companies. But I would honestly just start with something that is just more on brand for our generation. Not to say Shark Tank isn't great. Like I love Shark Tank, but my view is like, who are the figures of our generation that people resonate with? And what is just the format that's not on CNBC's TV channel, but is on IGTV, is doing a live episode on Clubhouse, is on Twitch, that people can watch it on the platforms that they choose to consume content. So I'd start by thinking about like, who are investors that our generation resonates with? And maybe it's like Chamath. Maybe it's like, I don't know, like Ali Webb, or like even like, I don't know, like a Gary V.
Yeah, definitely.
And then the question is what is going to be our unique spin or angle, where it's not literally just the four people in seats hearing a pitch from people, which the actual way Shark Tank is casted is it's like a 2-hour conversation that's cut down to like 5 minutes.
7 minutes, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like I think the high level concept is there, which is let's figure out our generation's version of like a startup investing competition from big name investors. But we have to figure out like, what is the format that's different? How is like the Brew's voice of like relatability and wittiness included in there? And the easiest part is, how do we distribute it to our audience? It's done on like the channels of the internet. I would say there's another way to take it, which is like actually do it where it's like a little bit more like Y Combinator-esque, where like the business doesn't exist yet, but you get a group of like, previous entrepreneurs or just people, almost like a hackathon, where they have a period of time. It's like a show where it takes you through their process of having to come up with a business idea together and create a prototype, and then pitch that prototype to investors, to like YC and other accelerators. And to me, that's also a really interesting thing, is like the serialized series of showing a group of people put their heads together to try to create a business from scratch, and the process of like arguing and whiteboarding and actually getting this thing out into the open, and then pitching it to like, a Sam Altman or someone from Y Combinator. That would be slightly different, but I think as interesting.
Yeah, man, I love the idea so much, because one of my favorite things to do for ideas is take what has already worked. I think you mentioned this before, like for generations, like QVC is another one. Like QVC worked for a long time. And there are some, especially in Asia, I think there's some things that are like more new school. But in the West, we don't really have anything that's like at scale that like everyone uses, or at least like a percentage of the population. And I think that will come eventually as well. And I think similar to this, there's old shows, old concepts that have always worked for a reason, because if there's a group of people who are interested in business, at least the story part as a casual viewer, now there's extra things we can do in the same way, like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire became like, forgot what HQ Trivia
like
is not exactly.
Trivia.
Yeah, it's not exactly the same, but it's similar, right? Like you're in the game, you turn up at a certain time, it's live, and so I think there's something interesting there. And I think more than that, just even on like not to get too sentimental about it, but like on a mission point of view from your company, like the fact that someone who's just watching previously can actually get upside in something they're investing their time in. And you can build up these new personalities that are talking about things more transparently. That's kind of cool.
I think what you end up finding is generation to generation, the container doesn't change much, but what goes through the container does, right? Like, so like the game show format, the interview format, the competition format, like these are like tried and true formats that people like. And I don't think that the formats are going anywhere. It's just what is pushed through the container, like what is the voice, what is the context, who are the personalities. I think that's what evolves it for a generation, and where is it distributed. So it's like, you know, what does it's almost like Fear Factor on TV. Well, that's now like Mr. Beast's different like competitions he runs, where it's like he'll give you $1 million or up to $1 million, and you go through a store and you have 60 seconds, and it's like whatever you can fit in your shopping cart in that 60 seconds, up to $1 million, he will pay for. It's like, and it's like the late night talk show, like that format's not going away, but it's like David Dobrik adding his new podcast on YouTube, like that could be what that format looks like for a new generation. And so I think it's a really interesting thing to think about, that like formats and vessels don't change, but what goes through the format, where it gets distributed, the voice, the talent, that is what does change.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I will say, like, even like Joe Rogan, for example, like those long form conversations just never would be put on TV. Like traditionally they would say, well, why are you doing a 3-hour interview? And like smoking on camera, like, you know, it just wouldn't make any sense. Totally. But like it proved that obviously it does make sense now. So there's no one really knows the answer. It's like there's a premise and things evolve, and humans don't know necessarily what they want until they receive it consistently. And even like the first episode of Joe Rogan was terrible. It was like them trying to figure out the webcam. So it's interesting to think of that, like when you're thinking of new concepts, there's something you can borrow, but put a new twist on it. We're going to have to wrap up soon. So for the sake of time, I'll move on to the last couple questions. In fact, probably my favorite episode of your podcast was the one where you talked about your dad and your father passing away, and you were incredibly honest and vulnerable. And if you don't mind, I'd love to just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure.
I think this happened like some time ago. By this point, was it like 10 years ago? Or
it was right before my junior year of college. So that was 2013. So
okay,
almost 8 years ago.
8 years ago. Yeah. And obviously incredibly sorry to hear that. But one of the things that you mentioned that it turned you, like you said that you became quite stoic and that you became numb to feelings. And the reason I bring that up is because I haven't had exactly the same, you know, like thankfully my parents are both around. But of course, everyone who's listening to this has had something in their life that has like hurt them, impacted them. They've become closed off, whether that's a relationship that's gone bad or whatever. And I just think, like we said earlier, like not enough people speak about these things. So if we're both talking about them publicly, we might as well talk about it together. So I'm curious, like from that moment, it doesn't have to be about your dad in particular, but just that moment of like closing out the world in a way. Are there certain things that you found over time that have helped you become like more emotional again and like feel those feelings again?
It's a great question, and I think I'm still trying to figure that out, because to your point, it's like it doesn't just have to be like a parent passing away to cause that thing, right? Like that happens to like people in relationships where they get very closed off because they've been hurt or traumatized in some way, and they push those feelings into their body. So I'd actually say it's very common, even if the circumstances are very different. Look, I think I'm still trying to figure that out. I think I still, in a lot of ways, I'm not incredibly emotional, or like at least outwardly demonstrative of emotions, right? Like I think I am an expressive person, but I'm not expressive in a lot of ways that people would be traditionally expressive from being emotional. And I think on this idea of being numb and stoic, again, I think it's a really good and a really bad thing. I think it's a good thing because it always forces me to have perspective on what's really important, where things don't really rattle me, because I always kind of like, it always goes through my brain of like, in the broad scheme of life, this is such a small thing, but I think it's also a bad thing, because I think in a lot of scenarios, like strong emotions and anxieties are survival mechanisms, right? That lead us to be really thoughtful about things. And so I think what I have to deal with is, how do I force myself to be thoughtful about things that most people would be, like struck by or anxious about, and that would force them to have to think about it. But for me, it's like, I don't know, I'll just use an example. It's like something happens in the business. I think ordinarily someone would be like freaked out by it and be like, what are we going to do? This is crazy. And like my default is, we're going to figure it out. Like we're going to figure it out and it'll be fine. The business is not going to go down. But I think that is both a good and a bad thing. It is good from a point of like, giving off this feeling of stability and calm, but it's not a good thing for myself, because I think it blinds me from really thinking deeply about all of the things that normally create anxieties for people in the business.
No, man, thanks for sharing that, man, because I think even just to volunteer my own experience as well, I think like I've had stuff in the past where you can call it trauma or whatever, and you realize, okay, I got through that. And therefore, when something else happens, you're like, oh, that's not that big a deal.
Exactly.
Like, and you diminish what it is. And that might, like you said, it's a good thing, like in a business context where you're like, oh, we've had a setback. Okay, cool. We're going to figure it out and let's keep moving. But where I think it really impacts you, and I don't know if you felt this too, is in your personal life, where like you can diminish, like let's say in a relationship, and you just diminish like other person's thoughts because you're like, well, you haven't really experienced bad. So,
I think that's exactly right. I think it can be dismissive or take power away from someone, because it'll make them feel like bad about feeling a certain way about something. If you give off the feeling like it's not that big of a deal, but at the end of the day, it's like, while I may not think it's a big deal, it's not my place to judge what's a big deal for people.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing I learned from Dr. Emily Anholt, she was on the show as well. She's a therapist and PhD in psychology or whatever. And she told me, I forgot what the phrase was. There's like a name for this, but especially in the last year, the way we've all had like terrible years in some ways. And like I caught myself doing this all the time where I'd say, oh, well, all things considered, I'm doing okay. Yep. Like people are dying and people are having a hard time, which in one way is being grateful, right? So I think that's a good thing. But the other thing is you're completely dismissing that you're also having a terrible time in your own way. Just because other people are having a worse time doesn't mean you just have to deflect it.
And it doesn't give you the permission to feel the things you may want to feel that are healthy to feel.
Exactly. And exactly, that's it. And I think probably for me anyway, it's been a protective, like it's me protecting myself from not feeling a certain way instead of just dealing with it and saying, okay, it's okay for me to feel down right now. And if I was like that for 6 months every day, that's a different story. Maybe there's something I need to change. But I think when you don't feel, you don't heal, as she told me. So there's like something there to that as well. True. So, well, thanks for sharing that, man. That's I think a great way to wrap up for us. Thanks for being so open, man. And absolutely. I think the last question I will ask though is there anything else you want to share with people listening? Anywhere we can obviously send people to Morning Brew and @BusinessBarista on Twitter, which is, by the way, incredible username. But is there anything else you'd like to leave with the audience?
No, I would just say that, I think it's such an amazing time to be alive in terms of the ability to, having so much power in your hands to express yourself and create and positively impact people, right? Like that's the leverage of the internet, is one person can positively or negatively impact millions of people. And that creates a ton of responsibility. But I also think it's a wildly empowering thing where there's more of an ability for you as a person to move a lot of people to be stronger, better, more thoughtful people simply by just your words.
Make the choice. That's it, man. I love that. That's a great way to finish, man. Thanks again, man. I'd love to do this again. This was an amazing conversation. So
would love it. Thanks so much for the time.